Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for bothering to come out in this windy January day. Thank you so much. Just a point of, not a point of order, information. We will be live streaming this meeting. Bridget wants to be involved, and as you know, she needs to be at home with Hugh. So if you don't want to be included, the final two pews don't get caught by the camera. But just bear that in mind, that we are recording this for the benefit of those that can't get here. And also, I think, if you wanted to check what was the answer to a question, you can refer to it. So just go into our YouTube bank, if you like, that we can refer to other times. So, Mark is on his way. But you'll remember, if you cast your mind back to the summer, back to July, and we had a lovely launch event with the Bishop of Chester, Mark, and we commissioned a video. Research shows that fundraising projects that use promotional videos are much more effective than those that don't. So we've had our promotional video made, and this is your opportunity to see the full version. Thank you. And you might recognise a few people in it. Our Future Foundations project is about adapting these Victorian buildings for modern needs. And the main driving aim of this project can be summed up in 3 words: to make the buildings more flexible, to allow the buildings to be more accessible, and for both buildings to be more sustainable. The building, as you see it with its pews, was developed in the Victorian period. It's a very static model, and it's predominantly designed for one use, and that's Sunday worship, for an hour on Sunday worship. There's no allowance for children, there's no allowance for buggies, for wheelchairs. So we believe this building needs to be more flexible. Church buildings today need to be used for a variety of reasons. For instance, we need a place where we can meet to teach the faith, whether that's preparing children for communion, confirmation, or talking to parents about baptism. We need a nice teaching environment using videos so that we can meet and talk. We also need to meet as a church council. This is the place where we gather to do our governance, so not just for formal meetings as well as informal meetings, and we don't have those separate meeting rooms in this huge space. So by making the building more flexible, that's what we'll be able to do. If you can see, then here there's a door halfway up the wall, because there used to be a gallery in this church, a platform with seating up there, and one of the things we want to do is reinstate that gallery. And so in this area will be where the stairs are to go upstairs. There'll also be a lift over here. And then we'll have a kitchen over here, and improved toilets on this side. And this space will have a dual purpose. During normal worship services, this will be circulation space, a welcome area, and after worship where we can have tea and coffee and circulate with one another. And here there'll be glass partition doors. The thing about them is that they can be folded completely back. When we have big services, big funerals, Christmas, any other big events, these doors can be folded right back. The other work that we need to do is to work on this platform. This platform is very big, it's permanent, and there's obviously a step, and we want to do away with this platform so that this floor is all the same level.
Some of our congregation will tell you that there have been 30 or 40 years of talks going into this, and so quite a lot of people have felt it's never going to happen. But now it is going to happen, and it's going to be exciting, and it's going to be something that we leave our legacy for future generations. We make our mark on church history so that in 100 years' time, people who come to St Anne's will say, what a good job those people did, how wonderful it was that they had that vision to make the church sustainable, to make it environmentally friendly, to make it relevant for the 21st century.
The Future Foundations project also needs to look after what we currently have. That means looking after the heating, the lighting, the redecorating the walls. You'll notice that there are large areas of our walls are peeling. They were damaged by water ingress many years ago. We've now rectified that by spending a lot of money looking after our roof, and we will continue to do that. But it does mean that now that the water has stopped coming in, we can redecorate the interior, make it much more attractive as it should be, fitting for a place where we worship God.
There are lots of reasons why we want to do this. We've got the church building itself, which is looking a bit sad and weary these days, that need lots of work to it. We want to get the heating sorted, we want to get it economically friendly, good for the environment. We want to welcome people to come to church, to come for the services we already do, to create new services for people to come to, and to use the space for other things as well, like singing or other concerts, and have the space much more versatile, that we can use it for much more than just our Sunday services. There's lots of ways that we can use the hall. We just all need to pull together to create an exciting space that we can all use for the future, and we just want somewhere that we can all look forward to coming and celebrate all the different aspects of life and being part of Sale community.
Welcome to our church hall. This, of course, wasn't built as a church hall, it was built as a school. So you can see the entrance is an old-fashioned door, and it goes into a toilet corridor, and it's quite dark. But we think we can do better here. Plus, we also recognise that I've got a school next door, a lot of parents come here, congregate here to pick up their children or drop them off and chat to one another. And again, we think if we could provide a community cafe here, then people can do that mixing and chatting over a coffee, not getting wet. There are about 800 people a week going through our hall doors, but because they just come for a particular function, we don't have that opportunity to meet with them, to tell them what we're doing here in the church, to listen to their views. But we feel that we can, by making the buildings more accessible with the cafe, that we will have that opportunity to listen and talk and meet in an informal way. Another thing we want to do with this project is to take away these windows and transform them into doors, patio doors. People then have access from indoors, spilling out into the lawn for events and parties, daytime, evening, because we've realised how valuable it is to have access to the outdoors.
two very different buildings. In the church, to make the sort of changes we're looking there, it's very much all or nothing in terms of making that major interventions, dealing with the heating systems, dealing with the levels in the building and so on. With the church hall though, there are other options. It could be done in different phases because there's elements being added. Refurbishment obviously would be the first step, but you could look at doing it in stages if needs must.
We are making this investment so that we are here for the future. We are a not-for-profit charity. We all know that the future looks costly, with increased energy prices and the imperative to go green. The Future Foundations project acknowledges the need to adapt to survive.
It's great to be here at St Anne's Sale as we launch this Future Buildings Appeal. What we're trying to do is raise £1 million in order to renovate both the church and the church hall. Not because buildings matter, although they matter a bit, but because people matter and community matters. And having great facilities actually enables us to serve the community in all sorts of ways, many of which we're already doing, of course, in part, but all sorts of other ways emerge. And we find this across the diocese and across the whole church as we invest in excellent buildings. So we see all sorts of community projects emerge. So I'd say to anyone who's actually passing by or looking on, why not get involved in what we're doing in community, and if you're able to be part of this appeal, that would be fantastic.
The Future Foundations project is a big project. It's an expensive project across the site, looking after both our Victorian buildings. And I appreciate that's daunting. It is a massive challenge. And I'm sure together, with everyone's support, we can make this investment in these buildings of benefit to generations to come. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. When I watched that video on my laptop, the sound quality was perfect and the visuals were perfect. So I'm very annoyed that it hasn't come across as well as it should. So please be assured that it is a good quality video. Well, I'll make sure that it's up on our website so that you do get the opportunity to see it again. So I need to hand over to Nicola and to Mark. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Thank you very much for coming on a Saturday morning. I'm just going to give you a bit of an update of where we are, and then obviously, as Alison has already said, we're going to talk to you about options, we're going to talk to you about what's happening this year. At some point we will talk about the elephant in the room, which is the fact that we actually have to find £1 million, and how are we going to do that. But at the moment, I'm going to start with an update. So basically, St Francis is now available for sale. So what we had to do was go through a process of giving Trafford Council a lead time for them to make a decision whether they wanted to buy St Francis. That was part of the covenant. We did that. They don't. We are now able to move on and sell St Francis. We have engaged with, looked at some different estate agents, effectively, development agencies, and we have used people that we've been recommended by the diocese, and what they're looking at is coming up with the best options. We have to do the right thing. We have to make the right amount of money from that building. And, and it's no secret. I've said to you all the way along, this is completely transparent. So pretty much what we're being told is if we just sell it as it is at the moment, we are looking to get about £500,000. If we actually sell it with outlying planning permission, so obviously that means that we have to pay for an architect to design those, and we have to get outlying planning permission to make it more appealing to developers. And we can put certain caveats around that. We can say, we're looking to make social housing, or however we want to do that, but we could then be looking at upwards of £1 million. So, and there's a big difference there, and that's a massive difference to us and what we can achieve. So we're going on that journey, and we will keep you updated and obviously ask for permission from PCC where we need to, as we've been doing all the way along. So obviously before Christmas we had a survey, and the PCC, based on that survey, agreed to proceed with the high-level design of the church, and we need to separate the church from the church hall. So what we obviously need to do now is to talk about the details of the design, and that's one of the reasons Mark is here today, because to sort of give us an idea of those things that we need to get involved in. Okay, I think, oh yes, so Building Brick Day. I am going to, so my bit, well it's not even my bit, is Thomas here? He's not here. So it's all about doing things differently, okay? This is an opportunity for us all to not do what we've done. Obviously I did the church raffle, but let's be honest, we're never going to build a new building just by doing raffles. But we are going to try and do as many different fundraising events as we can. And on the 9th of July, we will be having a building brick community, known to you and me as Lego, but not to be said officially because it's not a Lego branded event. These are a community of people that go round and have followings of 1,000, have followings of 1,000, thousands of people that come to see their creations. So we're going to run a Lego building brick day where they will come on the 8th in the afternoon, and they will build whatever they build in the church and the church hall. And if we happen to be in the middle of a heat wave, maybe outside as well. And then on the Saturday, we will run 3 sessions where we will invite people from wherever to come and have a, they'll be able to enjoy the church, they'll be able to enjoy the church hall, and they'll be able to enjoy Lego. So building bricks. So that I'm quite excited because that's something we've never done before, and who knows, hopefully we shall. The last one they did, I think, in Holmes Chapel, they had 600 people, and that was just a 1 session. So I'm hoping with the involvement of the school and that we can generate. So I will be looking for volunteers, not to build, but just for the other stuff that we might want to do around the side. But we'll be looking for stuff like that. So I've had this, and I will continue to show this every time we meet, of our journey. And it is, it is a long journey. It's the Valley of the Kings, in case anybody wants to know, and anybody like John Wayne Westerns. So it is a long road, but we are already making steps. We've already done the things that we wanted to do in 2021. 2022 is about getting all the permissions and also the funding to be able to do the works starting in 2023. And I know you think, my gosh, that's a long way away, but it is. But these things, trust me, I find it a long way away because I'm like, it really takes that long to do these things? But it really does, and Mark's going to explain a bit more why. But if we just break it down, so I realise that doesn't work very well, does it? Can you see? You can't see the white, so note to self to change the colour scheme. But basically, getting the faculty to agree is basically about a 4-month process. And they need to know everything. They need to know, and Mark's going to talk a bit more about this in a minute, and he'll talk about all the different things that they need to know, but that's a 4-month process. We also, at the same time, want to start looking at the church hall and getting the planning permission for that. And the thing with the church hall is that once we've got planning permission, we've got 3 years in which to start. Could take us 10 years to finish, but as long as we start within 3 years of that planning permission. So we want to get that done so that we know what we're looking to build in the church hall. And, who knows, and it'll be for us as a community to decide, we may want to do the church hall extension at the same time as some of this. We may actually want to do a bit of it before. That is all in our gift to decide how we want to do that, and obviously in the gift of the bank, to be honest, as to how much money we've got to be able to do that. So this year, like I say, by Easter, we're hoping that we know what we want to do with the church hall, and that we're in a position to submit those plans, and that we're a good way down with the faculty. Yeah? No pressure. But I'm going to hand over, and you're going to explain. Not got much to do, but I'll let you do that one. No, I meant in 4 months.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. Okay, we've got 2 buildings, but obviously what's critical to this project is how those 2 buildings work in terms of serving the community and obviously mission as well. They're 2 very different buildings and therefore have to go through quite a different process in terms of how we make those designs, those schemes real. So first we talk about the DAC approval. That specifically relates to this building, because this obviously is a place of worship primarily. It's a listed building as well. And because it's a listed building and it's a Church of England building, it has something called Ecclesiastical Exemption from listed building consent. So if the church hall was listed, you'd have to get listed building consent to make changes. Here we need to get a faculty. And the process of obtaining a faculty means that we have to make an application to the Diocese Advisory Committee, the DAC, who hopefully, in the fullness of time, will approve the proposals. It then goes to the Chancellor and Registrar to go through a legal process. The difficulty with this, obtaining that approval, is that it has to show every little detail of what's going to be proposed. So we'll have to have fully designed the screen at the back, the doors, even down to carpet, although there might be still some debate about colour, but, all those sort of things, even the chairs, will need to be explained to the DAC what's intended, so that when the Chancellor reviews the proposals, he can say, yep, all this has been approved and is agreed, and can go forward. Now, the DAC in itself has quite a task to go through. Not least we, as a community, as architects and designers, need to obviously make those proposals, produce them and agree them with ourselves. But also the DAC will consult with other bodies like Historic England, local authority and so forth. So as part of the process, we apply to the DAC as part of the online faculty system, but these other consultees that they're called are also involved. It's a bit like going for a planning permission in that you have a public notice period for allowing all these people to respond. So we've got a lot of work to do up front. We need to be sure of what we want to do, what the detail of what those things are, and then we make that process. Now, the joyful thing with working with the DAC, as opposed to with a local authority, dare I say, is that they have, the DAC virtually is a voluntary committee. All the people give their time freely and involves the archdeacons and so forth. But they will quite happily have informal consultations with them. So as the scheme develops and our thinking evolves, because of course at the moment it's at an outline sort of design stage, there's a lot of fine detail to add to that, we can consult with them at key stages through the process. So to make sure that they're on board with what we're thinking, and that if they think we might be going in slightly the wrong direction, they can obviously advise as well. Trying to make the process as smooth as possible so that when we do make the formal application, dare I say, it's almost just process at that point. We know that everybody's already supportive and that it'll be approved ultimately. So, as I've already mentioned, there's a lot to work out. And going through that process is key. The design team, as we shall call us collectively, which is myself, obviously, is the lead architect, but we'll have mechanical and electrical designers to design the heating and the lighting. We'll have a structural engineer as well, of course, because we've got that gallery and or structural interventions to the building as a consequence. There's also something exciting called a principal designer who will help us with the health and safety aspects as well. All that will be taken into consideration for the design process. Go to the next slide.
Can I just ask you, Mark, so will you just, what's the best way for us to be involved to do that?
Well, the best way I think is that we have a small group brought together as a building team representing the church from the PCC and key members, obviously, so that we can develop the proposals as the designers, the design team will make recommendations to that group. And then if they're supportive with those approaches, down to materials and colours and so forth even, then it can go to the larger committee group thereafter to hopefully confirm and ratify going forward. We often find that if you have a large committee, it's almost too many cooks and spoil the broth, and you need to sort of make sure that you get the key aspects covered and the key people are represented in, for key groups. Okay. Oh, it's your turn.
I'm just going to say a few words, and then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Don't worry, we're trying to present a range of information to you. From the survey that we did, it was very obvious that some people had questions and queries about the number of kitchens that we had in our two buildings. So I wanted to just clarify about the drawings. Some of that were just for representation purposes, so talk through that. Would somebody? No, I need to. Yeah, just this. So let's start with the hall kitchen. I've got a picture there of an industrial kitchen. It's not a picture of ours, but ours is a pretty good size. And the hall kitchen, why do we have a hall kitchen? Because we need a good size commercial kitchen for meals when you're doing about 100 plus people. And that will be for us when we do big parish events, when people who hire the church from us do big parties. So you need a high-grade commercial kitchen for large-scale catering, and there will always be a need for that. That's the function of the kitchen over in the hall. It's to cater for large numbers and be a good quality grade commercial kitchen. The role of the new cafe that we wish to put on the front it's partly doing the job of improving the entrance. Do you remember from that video, well, you know anyway, that the entrance to the hall, there's that big solid door which often gets left open and into that dark toilet corridor. So we think we can do better. Think of where you go to the cinema, go to the theatre. There's a foyer space, isn't there? Before you go into the actual chamber, the concert hall, the theatre, the cinema, there's foyer space where you can circulate, you're dry, you're out of the wind, you can buy refreshments, and you can talk to one another in comfort. So that's the role of the cafe. It's a meeting place, it's a circulation space. You heard me mention in the video about making connections with the 800 people a week use our buildings. I don't know them, and I don't suppose they know me. And that feels we're missing a pastoral opportunity. Now, it may be that many of the groups that use the hall are not interested in learning about what we're doing, in partnering with us, that people may want to come, they want to hire the building for their purposes and not have anything else to do with us. And that's fine, because at one level, that's what we're doing. We have a building to hire, and if you want to come and use it, you don't have to get involved in church. It may be at its basic level that that's all people want. But at the moment, that's all there is. If we could provide a cafe that is a meeting room, an informal space, so when people have finished their yoga, and instead of going straight home, or what they tend to do is lingering outside chatting to one another, maybe they could sit in our cafe, and maybe we could also pop in and just have conversations with people, have literature and information, have signboards welcoming them. You know, we've got Mother's Day service in church on such and such a day. You know, there's a little bit more of an opportunity to connect, to circulate, to just hang out with people in that informal space. So that's what the cafe is doing for any of our hall users, for us, for the school community, for the hall community. It's a place to just hang out with one another, and who knows what may develop from that opportunity to just be with one another before or after you've gone into the hall for your own formal meeting or whatever you've come there to do. And then lastly, again, Nicola, just do the finger. The purpose of a church kitchen. Has anybody here been to a church where there's a kitchen and had refreshments? Yeah, thank you. So I'm not thinking of cathedral cafes that tend to be separate. They're down, in the cloisters, aren't they? You have to walk a long way in cathedrals. They're a bit like hospitals. I'm thinking more of integral within the church. So a serving hatch, the sort of thing I mean, that we can have tea and coffee, biscuits. I would expect there to be a cooker, not a commercial size, not a sort of a 6-ring range, but something, because beyond serving refreshments on a Sunday or on a Wednesday, a cup of tea, biscuits, I would expect that possibly before or after a funeral. I've got 2 funerals this Thursday. Now, it's not appropriate for all funerals, but sometimes it is. Perhaps, again, after a christening. Again, it might not be appropriate for every occasion, but we might want to offer that. Or perhaps a small, intimate wedding that people don't necessarily want to go off to a big event, but maybe we could serve champagne and cake after the ceremony, whilst photographs are being taken. And then, of course, study groups. If we are using the building more, and that's one of the intentions of the gallery is having meeting rooms so that PCC, Bible study, confirmation classes, we can have that in here in more smaller, intimate space and serve drinks. So, for instance, we've got a school confirmation service coming up. Maybe after that event, we would like to just serve something to the parents there. We had a concert in here, I Sing Pop. Again, it's evening. Maybe we don't want to send people over to the hall. It just gives us that choice and option. But it's doing a different purpose from the big commercial kitchen that could serve meals. This might be just heating up. If we had a children's event, heating up some pizza, putting some jacket potatoes in, just so that we could serve, we have that option of serving maybe some hot food. So I'm going to stop that. So that's. I hope that explains the different roles and why we are including that so much hospitality across the 2 buildings. Thank you.
I was just going to ask, did anybody have any thoughts on the kitchens? And what I have done is, if you don't want to be recorded for posterity or on the stream, but you want to make a comment, please just put comments down, and there'll always be sheets of paper at the back for you to write any comments that you might want to. But I just wondered if anybody had got any thoughts on any of the kitchens, anything we need to think about. Sorry, yes, go on, sorry, I'm miles away. Go on. Is that on?
Handheld, yay.
Thank you. We've only seen one design for the church hall, and I'm led to believe that other people have put forward ideas. Have these been shared with the architect?
Right, we're going to go into the church hall, and I'm going to show you various designs that have been through, and we're going to pick that up in a minute.
Thank you.
Perfect timing. Anybody else?
Other questions, comments? Okay, sorry, yeah.
Who's going to staff the kitchen and the coffee?
Who's going to staff? Which kitchen? The one here? The cafe? That's all up for development proposal. So one option is that we employ, did you hear the question? The community cafe. One option is that we could employ somebody and that the profits from the cafe would then pay, because it has to be self-supporting. Another option is that we could work with charities, that you'd sign a contract that they would run it for 5 years, and they would take the profits, but that we would have, so we don't have any of the hassle of the health and safety and all the other food, safety, hygiene, that somebody else runs it, but that we're also promoting and working with a charity. You've seen this kind of thing, that people perhaps with learning difficulties, perhaps with ex-prisoners, so that's another option. We could put our own person there. So I don't have details. There are options to explore.
Yeah, and if you've got any ideas on that, then obviously, right now we don't have a cafe, but we were looking at one where actually, to encourage the start of a cafe, they actually put a porta cabin up while they were doing everything else to start people getting used to having a cafe. Obviously, weather permitting, but, anything is possible. We just need to work out what we want to do. Do you want to?
Yes, I know of a church who did exactly that, put a little coffee stand outside their church building, as it happens. It's in a busy place in Leeds. And they would be amazed how many people stopped to have a cup of coffee on the way past. It was very successful. And they're looking at doing a cafe actually in the church as a consequence, but anyway, that's by the by. The church hall, yes, it's a building that's going to work with this church building, but it actually has to go through a very different process in terms of detail, design and approvals. It isn't listed, thankfully, so there's no listed building consent issues. So the only approval we actually need to get in the first instance is planning approval. Because, of course, with the hall, there's going to be quite a transformation, particularly externally. We want to create a building which, as we've talked about already, Alison's mentioned, is open, is inviting, but also spills out into the grounds. And making those physical changes to the outside of the building is a material change in planning terms, and therefore needs a planning permission, a planning application. The church building, on the other hand, is going to change very little externally. Even the solar panels are going to be quite well hidden. Yes, in due course, we will probably need to seek planning permission for those as well, but they won't be as controversial in some ways. Having said that, I don't think the plans for the hall will be controversial, but again, it's a process we have to go through. So, unlike the proposals for the church building to receive the faculty and the permissions for this work, for the church hall, all we need to do is planning level drawings, which are very simple visualizations, elevations and plans of what it will look like. So it's actually a relatively quick process to get to that point if we can agree what the design should be. The time with the planning application, just like with the faculty, is that whole consultation period which will run in parallel, which gives the local residents and other people of interest or interested in the proposals to respond. The challenge with the hall, in many ways, is that it's a bit of a blank slate, in the sense that it's a very simple building, one big space with some loos stuck on the side, really, and a stage and a few little rooms at the back. And actually, in terms of options of what you can do with it, as a consequence, there's more you could do over there in terms of different variations and extents of work than you could do in the church building in some ways. The church building is defined, it's within a very limited site, there's very little grounds around it. The church hall has loads of space. And therefore, I suppose that's probably created a bit more debate about how far you go with it and what you actually include. So, we have been through quite a number of options, I think it's fair to say. And all of these options were based on a similar objective, the same need, as you might say, for statements of need in terms of what the church needs. It was always about creating that connection both internally and externally, making it more welcoming, providing better loos, providing better entrance spaces, and then ultimately leaving the whole space, which is a nice space in its own, as it is. You don't really want to be messing around with the best space. I suppose the challenge with this, though, was how far we go with it. Because, of course, the more building you do, the more expensive it gets. So it's about getting the level of new building, the level of development right. Yes, we need to, as we talked about when we were looking at the hall in detail a few months ago, we need to refurbish the existing building as it is, in a sense, better heating and better lighting and so on. But when it comes to new additions, you can go quite a long way, or you can be quite modest in that. And indeed, there's various phases you could do, as it was mentioned in that presentation. You could just refurbish the hall as it is at the moment to bring better energy conservation and so forth. Or you could do, the extension first and the cafe. You could do work at the back in terms of extensions. So this is, when we first started, we went, let's see how big we can make this. We didn't want to destroy your green space. So you can see there's the notion of the terrace coming out of the doors, going on to what is the green on that left-hand side of the image. And you can see there's a cafe space, which actually very large building on this early proposal, where actually we demolished the current entrance and toilet block and created a whole new building down that side, making a much bigger space. And then also extended it at the back, you can see, creating more room, more meeting spaces, office spaces, and so on and so forth. But of course, that was quite expensive. We then looked at a slightly smaller version, trying to reuse the existing building, and you can see extensions at the back as well. Again, slightly more modest. And then this is closer to the current scheme. It's not actually as we're doing at the moment, as the current designs show. But this really creates that entrance building and cafe space, which can spill out again onto the exterior. So what we're trying to do with this building, in some ways, is blur the line between inside and out. So that outside space, the grounds around the building, which are one of its nice features, having such a large green space in such a densely populated area, is a real benefit. And even on days like today, when you're having a mild winter's day, you could still actually stand outside, and some people with dogs and so forth might prefer that. Here's the current proposal, where you can see we scaled it back a little bit further, really keeping the whole of that toilet block as it currently is as little changed as possible, and indeed the kitchen's even in the same location because it's already a good sized space. Why remake something which is already good? But what we've done with this scheme is take the essence of what we're looking at with the other proposals, but to put that entrance block on the front where you can sit inside, where you can serve drinks and you can meet and greet people, but with those glass doors and so forth that allow you to spill out into the green space. And of course, the costings for this weren't inconsiderable, as we saw before.
So at the moment, when we've done the budgeting, it's based around this one?
It's based around this option. Certainly with the hall, you could spend twice the amount quite easily if you want for a very grand scheme. But the question is, do you need that much? And indeed, if for whatever reason in the future you decide that the kitchen and toilets don't need to be in that location, you wanted to demolish those to create an even bigger cafe, you could do. We talked about phases. We have to sort of at this stage design for what you need now and try and future-proof into the foreseeable future as possible. But it doesn't prevent future generations doing something even entirely different and more radical later. Do you want to talk about this?
So one of the things we need to do, because we can keep designing for years, because everybody will have different opinions, and what we need to try and do is actually look at the need of what we need to this building to achieve. So I threw some up that people have said, I know we want to be able to wheel somebody into a wheelchair, wheel somebody into a building to have a coffee. So that what you do is you build up what they call user stories, so that we can make sure that what we say to Mark, right, we need to make sure, let's just say we all agreed that we need to make sure that we want to be able to seat 300 people all at one go. Now, that immediately will tell Mark that he needs to look at that design to cope with 300 people. So any of those user stories, any of those things, Linda, I know we talked about making sure the toilets have got enough turning space in the toilet for the wheelchair and at the side. So where we've got user stories like that, I know as a mum, I'd like to be able to get my coffee and have somewhere to sit where I can watch the kids playing in the field. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean the cafe needs to go all the way to the end, but it does mean that I need to be able to take my coffee outside and have a chair to sit on outside. And so the more of those user stories, if you like, our list of needs we can get, the easier it'll be for the designers to go, right, well, we've met that, we've met that, we've met that. The other thing is I use the word need as opposed to want, because everything has no disrespect, has a ridiculous cost price. And so we have to balance what we need this building to achieve based on what we can afford. I talk about, us all winning the lottery next weekend and job done, but, not quite there. So if you can think about those user stories and feed them in so that we can make sure we cope. And yes, I guess, Mark, from a design point of view, we've got that design at the moment. What we need to do is to work out how far off that is. So, yeah. Come share.
Just to good. Just to sort of emphasise the process with the hall is actually a simpler one because of the planning permission process. There's not as much detail needed from the very beginning. So the joy of that actually is we could develop the proposals as they are now into a planning permission level of detail relatively quickly and submit and see how the local authority views that design. We'll get a response then, of course, and we'll know if it's going to be a challenge, if it's going to be a long process, or if it's going to be a relatively quick process. The great thing about planning permission is, of course, it lasts 3 years, but just because you've got permission doesn't mean you have to build it either. I know you will want to build it.
Because it costs.
Because it costs. But, I didn't tell you this before, within 12 months of getting that initial permission, if the design needs to change a little bit, you can resubmit free of charge within that first 12 months. So as the user stories come in, maybe you start using the building in a different way because you've got a temporary cafe set up, whatever. If the design needs to be tweaked prior to going to a more detailed level design, we could always make those changes and resubmit to amend the existing application.
And with the planning permission, we don't need to go into the level of detail like we have to do for the fact.
It's a relatively quick and, dare I say, low-cost process as a consequence.
Sorry, I just saw the lectern move over.
Okay. I thought you were gasping at the cost.
No.
It's a relatively, sorry, there's activity over there. It's relatively low cost because, of course, you're not having to pay for all the electrical designs, all the mechanical designs, all the structural designs. It's literally an architect's drawing an impression of what the building will look like. Yes, it needs to be reasonably realistic, but as an architect, we understand how those things would go together and know we could make it work. So it is quite a quick, relatively low-cost process. And in some ways, therefore, as a consequence, I'd suggest, as a church, you probably want to make that application as soon as possible. So at least then it's out there. And once you've got planning permission, you see, then it's a real project. You can actually build it at that point. Yes, you've got to go through all the detailed design, but that's all you need. There's things like building regulations and other tedious things that follow, but those are purely technical aspects. It's nothing that would stop the building from being built in principle.
And what it would also do, presumably, is it would get it out into the community. So if there are people that live locally that are not keen on having a cafe, at least we'd know. And also that would invite the wider community to be involved as well at that point.
Yes, there'll be the public notice period, so it'll go up onto the planning portal website, you could see it, and there'll be letters written to all local residents, making them aware of the proposals. There'll be a little notice put on the nearest telegraph pole or light post. So yes, it would be real and out there, and people who maybe aren't engaging with the building, particularly at the moment, may well find that, it's of interest to them and they've been brought to their attention. Because, of course, your primary people using and going past that building and, people going to the school, they're your sort of coincidental people who might use the cafe. Well, others might be interested as well.
Okay, I'm conscious that we're nearly there in terms of what we wanted to present. I think we've got one more discussion. One more slide. Would now be a good time to encourage people to sort of talk to the people beside them, and then we have some questions, and then do you want to explain what the bits of paper on the pews are for?
Yeah, again, it's very easy it's not very easy, but to stand here and talk. This isn't my project, this is our project. And so we need that input. Yes, we could submit that plan now. But actually, is it the right plan? But I wouldn't be doing my job for you guys if I said, and we'll keep talking about it for the next 2 years. So I'm telling you, and you, that we need to be submitting this by Easter.
Okay, so we can discuss it as many times as you like, but we want to be submitting something by Easter so that we all know that we've got a bit of a deadline there to help focus those conversations. And I'm more than happy to gather as much information from everybody to pull it together if we need to, you know, looking at the designs, however you want to do it, but and also the people that aren't here, making sure that they let us know. So as I said, there is a website, there's an email address for Future Foundations. There is a piece of paper on the pew that will always be at the back of the church as well for any comments. If now, let's just talk and see what you want to share a question. Right, can you just give the mic to Linda, please? Thanks, Linda.
Nicola, you brought up the subject of accessibility, and we
Yes.
have discussed this.
Yes.
Can I ask firstly, what is planned for the church hall? Mark found a solution, I'm not 100% about it, that for the church hall, because we're going to have the balcony, there will be an accessible toilet on both floors, right hand, left hand, you suggested. Because clearly the one we have here at the moment is only accessible to a number of people with disabilities. I've tried to raise this issue rather than leave it till today, and I've been subject to a lot of criticism, ridicule and discrimination that is quite rife among our community. And I feel very saddened that I've attended this church for 25 years and people aren't even willing to openly discuss this matter. People seem to think that disabled people are old people sat in a wheelchair. Do they not realise in this day and age, veterans come back with limbs missing, young people, family. If you have a member of your household who has a disability, that whole family is disabled. The community do not pay enough attention to disabled people. I'm not making this up, and I will share with you very, very briefly, because I've been ridiculed for wanting to bring this matter up. I grew up within a disabled family. I have no memories whatsoever of my father being able to walk. That impacts on the whole family. Very little has changed. I qualified as a social worker, worked for Trafford for 25 years, managing and developing services for adults with disabilities. So I am not making all of this up. It's my experience in life that is making me, in some people's eyes, making a fool of myself for fighting for these considerations. The church hall is not going to have a balcony. So are we going to have what on the government website is called a peninsula toilet, which means there will be access from either side? Now, yes, there are rules and regulations, and no architect is silly enough to submit a plan that isn't going to go through. But it's not really an honest choice that's online, because if you look, there are so many choices and options that there are gaps. And most of the time in this country, that's all my experience is, you can just go through those gaps and it suits the client, and it's quite often just the cheapest option, not the most genuine to welcome disabled people into this church. Would any one of us go out, go to a function in the church hall, come to the service, if we thought we wouldn't have the opportunity of going to the toilet should we need to?
Okay, so can I just ask, because we need support, so would you be our liaison from
Absolutely.
Right? So we'll make sure that we go through the plans with you to
Absolutely.
do that.
Very much
Great.
so.
Okay.
And I think we need to tackle the discrimination that exists in this church, because it's been dreadful. I've been treated so badly by people who just don't want to know.
Okay. I can't do anything about, all I can do from a project point of view is to make sure that we get the design that we need to do. We can't hear you. Just hang on.
One last thing. We visited that lovely church in Macclesfield. They were so welcoming. It was lovely. But quite honestly, in terms of discrimination, it was a nightmare. The lift, we all observed, well, not all of us, but a few of us, the lift that Alwyn used, fine. Alwyn happened to be in a small wheelchair, but she'd had the accident to her foot. Tim and Alwyn struggled to get out, really struggled to get out of the lift once it was at the balcony level, because it was squashed in a corner. If anybody in a larger wheelchair had gone in on their own with an electric wheelchair, they wouldn't have been able to get out of it at the upper level at all.
Okay, so we need to look at that.
Yeah, and on the balcony there looked very nice, oh yes. But I don't think he's here, is he, Mark? Is it Mike? Mike, he hung his walking stick on the balcony. And because it was all looking very lovely, the glass panels, but they had gaps in between, that walking stick fell from that height down to the bottom. Fortunately, there was no child, no adult stood at the lower level, because it would have been disastrous. Yes, I know.
Okay,
We need
all right.
to
So
really
these
look.
are all design things that we need to take into consideration. And if you've got that list, then that's great, because you can look at it and then we'll know that everybody else will know that you've been looking at it to cover that. So that works, doesn't it? To have somebody that's got that vested interest, absolutely. And it's exactly the same way, we've tried to approach people in the community that have got specific engineering skills and various skills to try and tap into the community to make sure that we cover all of that. Then, Linda, if you can do that from an accessibility point of view, that'd be perfect. Thank you. Sorry, go on.
Since our last meeting when I discussed about toilets being accessible, I've somehow got involved in an email that keeps coming from a company called Rise. And I've sent that email on to Future Foundations, to the Vicar, Church Wardens, to Linda, to Barbara. And next month they are running 2 workshops to discuss the accessibility for toilets for people with disabilities. Not disabled people, they are people with disabilities. And at some stage there's going to be government funding. There's £10 million that's going to become available to build these toilets, and we should be seriously thinking about accessing that funding, because it's a changing room facility which is slightly larger than you would have for a baby, but it will have a changing bed for an adult, toilets accessible on both sides for wheelchair access for either right or left-sided. There will be special toilets for able-bodied people, but also designed so that they are safe toilets to let young people go into them where there isn't a problem with drug abuse. So there is some companies out there that are promoting accessible toilets, and we need to latch in onto those companies and then definitely latch in onto that funding.
And is that something you think you could do?
Well, I've sent the email to you.
Yeah, okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah, and I've sent it to you, yeah, and you.
Yes, Elizabeth, I did look up. I think the project that you're talking about is called Changing Places. Yeah, so it's a big initiative. And the rules apply to buildings of 350 plus. So you have to be a building, so the funding is only available, and they're targeting buildings that are 350 people plus. If that's the project you're referring to, I have checked it out and looked at the details. Fine, yeah. But I did look that up, and if that's the criteria, we wouldn't be eligible. But by all means, we'll keep learning. And have you heard of that project, Changing Places?
I've heard of it. I didn't realise there was a grant available. I must admit.
Yeah, they're looking particularly at big service stations, cinemas. They're targeting the big places like that. That's where the money's available for those.
Do you want to?
Yeah, but but they always have criteria. Any grant funding, they always have criteria. And if we're not eligible, I'm just saying that's they're setting that criteria. So, yeah, indeed.
There is, and we need support in applying for it because we haven't got the resources at the moment to be able to do that. So it is, when I talk about the elephant in the room for the fundraising, absolutely the way we're going to get a lot of this fundraising is by applying for grants but we need some support to be able to do that, because we I work full time and do this. We need some help. So if there is anybody out there that thinks, I'll have a go at filling out for a grant and applying for, if there are accessibility grants or whatever, please we can't do it.
Okay, I've got other questions. But,
sorry, go on,
yeah.
just pass the microphone back. Sorry, go on.
As I keep getting the emails, would you like me to access one of those workshops and come
Fantastic.
back with information?
Yeah, perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I've nothing to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. Please do.
It was just that
Use the microphone, Barbara.
Sorry, if you're talking about support
Yes.
to fill in forms for grants,
Yeah.
it's not that easy, and it's not something that anybody can do. It needs somebody who knows what they're doing, knows how to get the forms filled in, and knows how to approach the grant organisation. We really ought to think about employing somebody who can do this for us. I don't think I've had experience of filling in forms for grants when I was working, and you've got to know exactly what you're doing. We need people who know how to do these jobs.
Okay, so maybe that's an option. Maybe that's something that we did
look at that, Nicola, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did approach somebody, and we just it was silly money, wasn't it? We just couldn't afford them. Yeah. So we have made some inquiries on that option, and we just felt it was just far too costly to the project.
But it might be the only option if we haven't got the skills.
Yeah.
And we have to take it out of the grant that we get if we get,
Yeah. Well, from our initial inquiries, but yeah, maybe it's quite, as you say, it's quite skilled, so they want quite a big. They're quite there. I'm sure there are queries, questions.
I'd just like to make an observation of support, really. I've been trying to get involved in building projects here since 1991, 30 years. I'm one of the ones who's been banging my head against a brick wall for 30 years. And finally, the machinery is starting to move, and that is fantastic. I think the thing I would like to point out, I'm a civil engineer. I'm a safety professional as well. These things do take a long time. Mark, you're just at the beginning of the road, and it's fabulous that points are being raised, and I'm sure you'll be scratching your head and what hair you've got left, because you've got less than me. Mine's a bit greyer, I think. I'm sure you'll be scratching your head to take on board all these points. I go back to 3 things that Alison said in that video: flexible, accessible, sustainable. They are our benchmarks. I hope they're your benchmark. And if the toilet provision isn't flexible, accessible, sustainable, then we've not ticked that box, and we need to find a different way of ticking it. So I would like to offer some reassurance to those who perhaps think they're being ignored. I don't think they are, and I'm not involved at the moment, but these things take time to develop. But at the back of our mind all the time, why do we want a building that's flexible? Because we want to meet people here to worship, to pray, to share fellowship. We want to be accessible for all the reasons you've said. And I'd like to think with those 3 mission marks, if I can call them that, that is what we'll strive to do. Because if we don't, then we haven't ticked those criteria. And we want things to be sustainable. We hear that on the news every day. Our planet is in a desperate state. So I would want to encourage people to get involved. The church is not Alison. The church is us, the people. And if we're not willing to get stuck in, I've offered some time. I haven't got a lot of time at the moment, but I've offered some time. If everybody offered that little bit of time, fabulous. You know, go on a course, feedback. If you can have a bash at doing things, I would encourage everybody to do that. Because otherwise, we'll be sat here again in another 30 years' time. Well, I might be just. Most of you won't, dare I say it. Maybe I might not be, but I'll be pretty doddery by then. But just encouragement. I sustain in your memory those 3 words: flexible, accessible, sustainable. Those are our benchmarks. And I would look forward to supporting Mark. I'd like to hear a bit more about the church, because that's going to be the trickier one. I think the hall's easy. Mark might not think so, but I think the church is the difficult one. Sorry, I've given a sermon, so thank you.
Yeah, and just to respond to that, really, I mean, in terms of the difficulty, the hall is difficult because of the amount of options available, actually. The church is difficult because it's a listed building, because it's a place of worship. You know, it's a different type of architecture. So they both have their challenges, but different ones. And indeed, now's the time to build in all those accessibility, flexibility options. Because of course, you're quite right. At the moment, it's little more than a sketch on a plan. And now we've got to start to make it real. So feeding in that detail about what's actually needed, exactly how big it is, how much the turning circles are, all those things need to be worked out. And now's the time to sort of get involved and define those things. Because we can only draw what's asked of. There's often an architect says, a client is more important, a good client is more important than a good architect in a sense. If somebody knows what they want and is clear about it, we can make it happen. But if there's any ambiguity and assumptions are made, then it's not necessarily right.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions about over here? Thank you.
On a purely sort of practical point of view, because I'm pretty much a practical person, when we went to St Michael's, I was struck by how small the space in the gallery was, and I'm told that our space here is going to be even smaller. So I would want to ask how many people you think we can actually fit in there, and therefore would the cost of doing it be justified by how many people we can fit in there, especially if you've got toilets and kitchens and stuff.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I don't have the drawing in front of me, to be honest. The issue we have, I mean, I know St Michael's quite well. I've actually given a talk up in one of the rooms in the past. And it is a small meeting room, but I don't actually know the dimensions. So it would be quite interesting to do a sort of dimensional comparison, because obviously that's a space people now know. And we can almost mark it out on the floor, how big that space would be in this church, just to see how it works.
Yeah, that would certainly help people visualise it and therefore get a better idea of what it's going to be like.
And of course, once we get the plans out, we could even mark and tape up around the pews here, saying, well, this is how far the gallery will come out to. And you could actually, okay, you have to pretend the pews aren't there, but you could actually stand in it and get a sense of the space. Because I think at St Michael's, it's quite a lofty church, and therefore it's got 3 floors. It's a much taller building, but yours feels broader.
Yeah.
Upstairs gallery or the upstairs gallery?
Upstairs.
Ah, okay.
Because upstairs you're going to have a toilet, aren't you? And you're going to have a lift, which is going to take up a fair amount of the space.
The lift is that will all be included in the tower.
Right, but you still have to have the turning space out when you get out of it.
Yeah,
and the toilet.
Just to respond to that, the designs at the moment have tried to fit all the sort of facilities, toilets, kitchens, meeting, enclosed smaller spaces, what the exact size needs to be defined, into what is effectively the aisles or the tower.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is create as open and a larger central space as possible, because of course, for worship, for any gathering in this building, the prime seats, the best place is in the nave. Even though you've got quite slender columns, you do have poorer sight lines. These two columns here particularly are massive. So if someone's at the front, if you're in the aisles, it's not so good. So we're deliberately trying to keep as big a space in the centre as possible. And that's why I say it feels broader. It's been a while since I've been to St. Michael's. I think they've had to put some of their kitchen spaces maybe into the nave a bit, which maybe has squashed it down a bit. I'd have to check.
If you turn around and look where Pauline is standing, and then where the toilet is now, the toilet door, that the whole from Pauline to the current church door, that is the size of the downstairs gallery room and the upstairs gallery room. Because the kitchen, the stairs, the lift and the toilets are all in the two sides. They don't impinge on, say, from where Pauline is to, so we've got all of that width. Does that help?
I'm spatially challenged.
We do show sort of tables and chairs on the plans, and one of the things we can do is when we go into the detailed design is show more detailed layout. So, of course, there's different ways of using a space.
Yeah.
If you're doing an informal gathering where people are individual sort of cafe tables and so forth, you might have 4 or 5 people around a table. That takes up more space than if you're having a talk, a small gathering, or a teaching session there, where everybody might be sat in rows instead. So we can look at how many we can accommodate based on sort of different uses.
It is more the upstairs, really, because obviously downstairs you can spill out into the main church if you need to. But upstairs, if you can only fit 5 people and a couple of dogs, then...
Oh, no, it's a lot bigger than that. It's a lot bigger than that. It sort of
seems a bit...
Yeah.
Sorry about the dogs, but, the cats wouldn't come with the dogs.
No, it's a lot bigger than that. And what's good about having different sizes of spaces is you don't want necessarily a big space all the time. So if you've got a relatively small gathering, we've incorporated, for instance, in some of the designs, a prayer-stroke meeting room to one side, which would be quite an intimate space for only a handful of people. The main gallery space, or even the space beneath, is that intermediate-sized space. So if you've got a gathering of a dozen, maybe even 20 people, you could sit in there. And then obviously if it gets any bigger than that, well, you might as well be in the church space proper, in the worship space. So it's also thinking about how you might use them and having the flexibility of different size spaces for those different purposes, really.
Okay, another question that people have raised with me is, if we're going to have more rooms over in the hall, why do we need rooms in the church?
Different purposes and uses, I would say.
Right.
We deliberately, this is why we need to look at both designs in tandem, actually, because there's no point doing it twice and paying twice. You need to make sure that what's designed for here, the kitchen being a prime example, isn't replicated or duplicated there. It needs to be for another purpose. So it's getting those usages right.
Okay, because I think I seem to remember in the dim and distant past when all of this began that we were talking about hiring out the meeting rooms here to raise some income. So we do need to be careful about how we duplicate things or not. Because obviously we don't want things going over in the hall and trying to duplicate them over here. We need to be sort of perhaps a bit more selective maybe, I don't know. But if we're going to hope to make income out of it, then it needs to be a decent size for people to meet in, doesn't it? So I guess that's my main point.
Yeah, so that mission message, accessibility, flexible, sustainable, sustainable is quite a big area, so it's not just environmentally sustainable, but that St. Anne's is sustainable. We don't have any other income stream other than you, okay? The hall costs us £17,500 to run, and our income is £17,500. We don't make anything on our hall. So all that work, all that time and effort, and we get nothing. By increasing the amount of letting space, both there and here and there, and we'll be selective about what type of groups. Concerts are obviously appropriate here. It would be appropriate for the Mothers' Union to meet here, the Brownies, etc., smaller, more cosier, intimate space, and then the big kids' parties over in there. Anyway, who hires it, that's all up for debate. But by increasing the amount of letting space and reducing the cost of running these buildings, we should end up with income which we can plough back into St. Anne's. Now, we could plough that back into staff. So when the Archdeacon came to see me years ago when I first arrived here, he suggested that we might like do what many churches do, that use that increased income to fund a part-time administrator or to fund the part-time children's and families worker. You know, we've got startup money, but it needs to be sustainable. So that is one of the drives. We've talked about the buildings being used more often, and this building is now used by a choir. Matthew, our choir leader, is hiring it. So by them increasing our income, I mean, it's just basic maths, isn't it? Increasing our income, reducing the expenditure, that should leave us with income that we can plough back into these buildings, whether it's replacing a boiler in 10 years' time, whether it's repairs to the roof, or if it's also about employing staff to sustain the ministry here at St Anne's. Thank you. Other?
Actually been a really good demonstration of my question. So you mentioned that the pillars are quite significant. I don't know how many members of the congregation have actually tried to sit in the children's area, but you can't see anything. You can't see the altar, you can't see the sermon, you can't see the main screen. So your entire worship is that screen there. That's all you have. So I've been trying to get attention for a little while, and it's the same over on that side. So I wonder if we can be smart when we're designing the space and recognise that that is not useful worship space. It's not, it's substandard. So our provision for parents with children, even if we just brought out the parent seat in here because the children aren't paying attention and swapped around where the children play, is something we could consider. But also just to remember that those spaces aren't where we should be expecting to seat fully engaged active members of the congregation. So that was actually my point. And then the other point to say, based on what Linda was saying, is an accessible toilet is not just for people with disabilities, it's also for families. So I often use really good accessible toilets to change my daughter. And if we're wanting to attract more families to the area, that's another reason to do it. It's right to do it just for people with disabilities, but it's accessible to all.
And just to respond to that, I mean, I've got a young daughter. Thankfully, she can go to the toilet by herself these days, most of the time. But yes, you do use accessible loos and larger spaces very differently as a parent. And that's another reason why we're trying to push all the sort of smaller spaces to the sides where the light, the kitchen and all those things, where you don't need the sight lines, because of course it's poor. You want to try and keep the middle spaces, the nave space, as open as possible. So if you have a child who is being a little bit disruptive and you want to have that sort of breakout space, go upstairs, and then you've still got a wonderful view as well.
Yeah, and that's that has also been one of the drives by reinstating the gallery, the downstairs gallery during Sunday worship. That's breakout space for parents, because you've got fantastic sight lines. And but if the child is restless or crying, that they can be there, so still in the building, but the crying isn't disrupting 60 or 70 adults. But so that's, and you've seen that, I'm sure, in other churches, the space at the back. Yeah. So we'd have speakers there for the sound and visibility.
And I think you're quite right. Those breakout spaces are for the parents rather than the child, because most congregations are quite tolerant of children crying. It's the adults who feel, the parents that feel bad, and you feel you have to escape. I've been there. It's not nice.
Other comments? How are we doing? It's, is it 10 to 12?
Yeah. Over the years, I get the impression that a number of churches trying to modernise old buildings run into trouble with the Victorian Society, who throw a spanner in the works. Is there anything in what we have in mind for this building that is likely to invoke the wrath of the Victorian Society? I mean, do we need to do things to keep them on board? Does the Diocesan Advisory Committee consult them? They don't seem to have any official role in life, but they seem to exercise a fair amount of clout when it comes to tampering with Victorian buildings.
That is right. Is anybody a member of the Victorian Society here? Used to be. Yeah, I mean, actually, I used to be a member at one time as well. That's another matter. I left quite quickly. No, actually, I mean, they all... obviously, their emphasis is on Victorian buildings. I mean, they obviously love Victorian buildings. They're not necessarily, a member of a church, but they still love the buildings for what they are. And I guess the nature of the Victorian Society is they don't really want them to change. The pews in a Victorian church was integral to that design because that was their concept, their image of what worship was at that time. So quite often, yes, the pews are specially designed for those buildings and are beautiful things in their own right. That's when you get the tension between the benefits to the mission and worship and community by having a flexible space versus a very static form of space with the pews. So you're fortunate in a couple of ways, actually, at this church. Firstly, you're only grade 2 listed, which is a nice place to be. That means you're not too important, but you're important enough to get your VAT back. That's good. Secondly, your pews, although are not as bad in terms of comfort compared to many, I know a lot worse. I know worse. At least the back has a slight slope to it. Some of them. Yeah. Well, everybody was smaller back then as well. We've got bigger. Yeah. Embarrassing. Well, anyway, they're not as bad as they might be, but they're not things of beauty in their own right. They're not fine pieces of design, dare I say, or joinery. You'll go to some churches, particularly the ancient ones, and they'll have the original, 16th century pews or whatever in there. And some of them are just glorious things. They might be useless to sit in, but they are beautiful artifacts. Yours are not. So in terms of the significance of the building, yes, the Victorian Society probably isn't going to support the proposals. I think the best we could hope for is no comment. And they may well decide to do that in this instance. What will be critical, though, and I've seen this happen at St Mary's Ashton-on-Mersey, just really down the road from here, that went to consistory court because the Victorian Society objected over the choice of chairs and carpet because they hate carpet. So, and in fact, actually, for community space, carpet's a really bad idea anyway, because it shows the dirt, the grime, spill coffee on it, it's a nightmare. So I would not encourage you to go down that route. But equally so, I can advise you on what will be more acceptable to the likes of the Victorian Society to try and ease it through the process of getting approval. Now, that doesn't mean that you should do everything that they would want to make it as easy as possible, because there's something that's really important, you need to fight for it. But we really don't want this to go to consistory court, and we want it to go through the process as smoothly as possible. I don't think you'll have that problem here.
Mark, on that note, because there have been alterations down through the years, pews were taken away down here, pews were taken away over there, does that influence and change that there has been significant alterations through the years?
Yes, you don't have a full set anymore, which is sometimes the argument, so that helps a little. But I still come back to the point that the pews are nothing special and they don't contribute anything significant to the building. So I think you can argue a good, strong case here. And actually what's also interesting, even Historic England, who actually are the more important consultee in terms of heritage issues versus the sort of Victorian Society, there is kind of a hierarchy. They don't even want to be asked about the removal of pews in grade 2 churches anymore. They don't even want to comment because they just accept it's something that's got to happen. Because they understand buildings have to be allowed to change. If they don't change, they die. And you lose the heritage of everything then. And in fact, the best way to preserve any building is to retain it for its original use, and obviously, mission and worship. If you need that space to be flexible to allow that to continue, then it's got to happen.
Thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to ask a simple question about the doors as you come in, the very front doors. We try very hard to heat this church, and it costs a lot to heat this church. And we have huge gaps under the door and all the way around, the glass doors. Is there a plan to change the doors on the front or to do anything about them? Yes, there is. The glass doors are beautiful in the sense that they give you that maximum visual impact in terms of what they look like. And they work well in shop settings where they have hot air blowers and you've got people coming and going, wearing coats. You know, it's quite an active space. But certainly for a space like this, they are bad because of those gaps. And there's nothing you can do about that. You can't put draft seals on them. So we're effectively going to have another line of defence. You know, your entrance space is for a large proportion of the time going to be a lobby. So those doors will be draft sealed, and obviously some acoustic insulation will be in them by having double glazed units in them, so increasing thermal performance. But I think one of the things we will also want to look at is those doors, because the more we can make them a framed door with draft seals and so on, the better the thermal performance will be. And that will come out of the detailed design, which we're about to embark on. Yeah. Well, that's the other design's downside. There's a reason why all historic doors have a frame. They're quite useful to like keep out the drafts and put locks in. That's, you know, when you've got a beautiful glass door, they tend to be at the bottom. Or sometimes at the top. Or both. So yes, I mean, they are lovely things for the right setting, but maybe not in this setting.
I'm conscious that it's about 5 to 12 and you want people to fill out the form. We said that we'd end at 12.
Yeah, I just want people to
Does anybody have any burning comments, questions?
I just want to make sure that, yes, take a form away if you want. It's just a piece of paper to make sure that we get information and comments. Thank you very much for everybody's feedback so far. As we've said, you know, we talked about the design, the next step. Presumably, Mark, you are going to give us ideas that we're then going to look at, sort of mood board type things for... yeah, go on. Yeah, just next steps.
The next step, as far as I am concerned, is that we meet and have a design team meeting. So we get together the structural engineer in terms of developing, you know, proposals for the church, that we can obviously look at the hall at the same time. We get together the the engineers, that's mechanical, electrical and structural, ourselves, and then key members of your building group and committees, so that we can sit down and agree what the key issues are with the project, agree a programme for it as well, go through the important aspects like accessibility, loos and so forth, and then we can then agree what process we should go through to refine the designs to incorporate those elements. And of course, as you rightly say, at a key point in that process, we will produce things like mood boards, where you'll have different material samples and so forth, so they can be seen and visualised as well. So yeah, that's all part of the process. But we need that inception meeting first.
Right. Oh, sorry, good. Right, okay, so to those people that have kindly volunteered, or I've volunteered you, we will set that up. And, you know, just if you want to be part of that, fantastic. It doesn't mean if you're not part of that, that doesn't mean by any stretch that you are excluded. We will keep doing these and just keep telling you what we're doing. And then if that smaller group wants to take a survey, then obviously we'll be putting the surveys out. But again, just keep feeding us things to think about. I sit here and I think, actually, do you know, the green and the red is quite nice on the pillars, you know, because actually we will need to think about that. We will need to think, do you know, actually, I like beige, you know, maybe not always good on my plate, but it's, you know, think about these things, because those are the things that we have to decide. And, you know, as well as, like I say, make sure you do your lottery, make sure you pray, but thank you very much for coming out and being on the journey with us.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I hope, is this helpful, doing it in this way? Yeah, every couple of months, or when we've got something for the feedback? Like, I'm seeing nods. it would be lovely to, yeah, go on, Mike, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think these things are very useful because you've given us a lot of information, given us a lot to think about. There's various things that have come up that I've never thought about it, and now we've got something to think about.
And the last thing that I wanted to ask is, we did the visit to Macclesfield. Would they be helpful? Would you like to go to? I mean, I've asked around, and we cannot find a Victorian church that the gallery is exactly like this. It just doesn't exist. So wherever we go, it's a version of what we're trying to do. And again, the same with the hall. We can go to other halls where they've got the acoustic screen, where they've got cafes. Then it's never going to be the same as us, but it might stimulate ideas and you just see how it works for them. Would that be helpful? Is that kind of, even though you're going to a place that's never going to be the same as ours, but are visits helpful? Yeah. Yes? Yeah. I've mentioned about going to the church at Compstall where you did those. There was a gallery there already there, and you did the doors, so I've suggested that one. But so yeah, let me know if you think the halls and going to see how people use these spaces, parish offices and community cafes, etc. Thank you.
Okay, so just to as I do, just to summarise the actions from this meeting, we're going to set up that next meeting. Please let me know the design meeting to start going through with the design consultants. I've got a couple of people's names already. We're going to try and do some sort of visualise and try and mark things out and see if we can put some tape out. And like I say, I'm going to build a Lego community. So if you'd like to be part of that, because I'm obviously going to be looking to maximise revenue potential on that one, but also, if you do know somebody that you think could do grants, for instance, it's all of this stuff we have to be looking at. So any help is greatly received. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Oh yes, Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia. Yes. I'm looking at people who are going to go, way. But we have a fantastic space here. We've got a great screen. Why don't we watch films? Why don't we, make the most of the space, the acoustics, and so we're looking at things like that. I think, I've sort of given up beating the drum about having a fundraiser solely on the project, but if we come up with ideas and people stick their hand up to help run with them, then that's great too. So thank you very much all. Thank you.